We'll be discussing The Masterminds and Wingmen by Rosalind Wiseman. This is Maddie.
Rachel.
John.
Ashley.
And Rachel.
This book discusses the 8 different types of male adolescents often seen in the high school social setting. The first one is the mastermind. He is charismatic and able to influence others through his power and control, but he has a lot of pressure from his social position, and that's based on fear and losing his power.
The next one is the associate. The associate is much more talkative and well-liked. And basically they just go through and talk about what does he lose, any identity separate from the mastermind, what mom and dad should know when you're a parent, and the achievements.
The next character is the bouncer. He's big, tall, intimidating, and willing to sacrifice himself as one of his job responsibilities. He isn't good at verbally defending himself and can't read or understand motivations. He can be rude to guys who are outside of his group, and he'll say stupid, perverted things to girls because the mastermind or associate tells him to. He's often the odd man out in situations with girls, or the guys set him up with someone who is similarly socially vulnerable.
The next one is the entertainer. He often diffuses tension, and he's willing to make fun of himself and do awkward things to refocus the attention. He uses humor a lot, which allows him to be secure and forgiving. However, he doesn't usually, whenever he's being serious, he isn't taken seriously because his friends are so used to him always being the jokester.
All right. The next is the conscience. The conscience worries about getting caught and the consequences of the actions of the group. And depending on how vocal he is, the other guys can find the conscience annoying because he's like having a chaperone around. If they have a lot of history with him, they'll put up with him, but if they don't, then he could be easily dismissed from the group and not follow his suggestions. Because he wants to follow the rules, he's much more likely to always do his schoolwork and take care of his responsibilities, which leaves him vulnerable to both sharing his work with his friends and doing their work for him, and then being ridiculed for having done his work in the first place. Sometimes he'll get tired of being the nice guy in the group and will do something that's not so innocent to prove that he's not that personality.
The punching bag is outside of the group, and the punching bag is somebody who's in the group but is often ridiculed by people outside but is often defended by his friends in the group.
So the fly is a guy that can guys can tolerate a fly for a while, but usually the frustration builds, and at some point the other guys have had enough and lash out. There's no guilt when excluding him because he's seen as bringing it on himself.
Also, quick correction, there was a typo on our paper. The punching bag is usually made fun of by his friends, but if anyone outside of his friend group makes fun of him, they will defend him.
The last category is the champion. He isn't controlled by the boy world categories, but has enough of its positive characteristics that people respect him. People like him, he can take criticism, doesn't make people choose friends, and doesn't blow off someone for a better offer. When people are harassed or demeaned, he intervenes. He's comfortable hanging out with guys who are both inside and outside that act like a man ideal. He holds his own opinion, but still listens to others.
So now we're just going to go through the different characters and relate them to the articles that we've read and what we've seen and experienced in high school. So starting with the mastermind, this is someone who is the epitome of masculinity, and because of this has a lot of standards that he feels like he has to meet, or pressure from his peers to be that ideal male figure. An article that I read was about masculinity, and it took for high school students with different social rankings, and the ones that had popularity often referred to the younger selves as fearing speaking up in class for being made fun of or being like a try-hard, or just doing what they think that they needed to do to be cool, but since they were seniors, they thought they didn't reflect on their current selves as having those fears or insecurities when they often still did in high school, because that they still are under the pressure to maintain their masculinity.
An article I read was called No Future for Boys, and basically it just talked about how, as Maddie said, boys have to keep a certain image, and so especially in the classroom, they don't want to be seen as like smart. They just want to kind of get through school, but also in the article it talked about how as like teachers they have to find ways to incorporate boys and how they can change their perspective on schooling.
Do you think that in changing that perspective, like, so I know that one of the strategies was to just continuously encourage open communication, but obviously that's difficult because they're high school boys.
Yes.
They don't want to have open communication. So what's like, I don't know, like what as like a future teacher, any of you, what do you think would be a good way for us to encourage open communication?
I think smaller group settings that have both genders will maybe encourage the boys to speak up, because girls are typically the ones speaking up, but in a smaller setting, I feel like it might be more comfortable for guys to open up about what they really think. And then, you know, if the group has to share with the teacher, it doesn't necessarily have to be the guys sharing in front of the class to have their opinions heard.
I think you have to have material that can go for both genders, boys or girls. You can't just have like, well, what do you think about school dress code? Well, of course girls are going to be like more talkative about that than guys. So you have to find a medium for them both to where it's not just mainly male or mainly female topics, but it's a middle.
Okay, so now we will discuss the associate personality. So I will be talking about bullying for most of this. So the associate personality is the one who is going to encourage the bullying for the group. In an article called Personality Connectedness as Predictors of School Bullying Among Adolescent Boys, it discusses that bullies have high levels of connectedness, which affects their family, school, friends, and the self. And connectedness is defined as the positive bonds with people and institutions that are reflected in bidirectional exchanges between the individual and their peers, family, school, and community, which both parties contribute to the relationship. And this is what the associate is, because the associate is well liked by everyone and has more connections than the mastermind does. So the associate is going to be the one in the group who does all the bullying. And the higher your connectedness level is in your personality, the more likely you are going to get involved in bullying, whether or not you want to be. So anyone in the group will be more likely to be a bully, just because if the associate wants them to do it, then they're going to, just by having that connected bond.
Do you think that could be like not brought into the classroom? Maybe have a classroom setting that you make it very known?
You're going to have to break up those groups so that way it doesn't encourage it. And you're going to have to determine which boys are more susceptible to those leaders in the group, so like the mastermind and the associate. So put like the bouncer personality or the conscience personality together, so that way they're not encouraged to engage in that behavior.
One thing that I found was there was a little note in one of my sources that said the word dignity is usually used instead of respect to communicate that everyone inherently should be treated with worth. And they said this is because the boys often see respect being overused or when adults are lecturing them. Do you feel like that is applicable to your sources in any way? Like, do you think that could be known in a classroom setting?
I think it can be known in the classroom setting. But with the respect to the dignity, it doesn't matter on the boys that are lower level. You have to present that to the mastermind and the associate. So you're gonna have to determine those personality types in the group as a teacher right off the bat.
Yeah, discernment's important for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a good way to do that is looking at hearing from teachers who maybe have taught the same students before, or going back kind of through their history to see had there been any problems of bullying in their past, either as the victim or the aggressor, and looking at that as how to handle your classroom even before you have them in your physical classroom.
So the next category is the bouncer. You see these a lot in middle school and early on in high school because people are still kind of trying to find where they fit. So it's easy to see where someone like the mastermind or the associate would take advantage of somebody who's thinking that they're finding friendship by finding a commonality and then just kind of getting burned by it. Some notes on it were, what does the bouncer necessarily gain from this relationship? It gives him a little bit of social status because he's known to be friends with whether it's the mastermind or the associate, and stuff that he wouldn't normally have. But at the same time, when the mastermind and the associate take advantage, he loses not only respect from his peers, but some other things. Oftentimes you can see these with kids that they may, from a teacher's perspective, you know that like they come from a good family or they seem like a nice kid. They're just not necessarily aware of what's going on and will immediately kind of give themselves and others up if a parent is brought in or something similar. Another note was that they have no respect for female authority figures or men outside of the act like a man ideal.
I think something that, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, I think something that I thought was interesting when we read this part in the book was that Dr. Price talked about that student she had who he came from a culture where they didn't respect women. So nothing a part of him was trying to, he wasn't trying to be disrespectful. He just never had to respect women. It wasn't purposeful, spitefulness. And so I really enjoyed how she sat him down and was like, hey, this is the law of my classroom, so you have to respect it. And I really liked that strategy of just being direct, hitting the problem at the source, and then if that didn't work, bringing in parents later on.
And I think a lot of that has changed more recently in our culture from the guys have to be so macho, and that I think in some way with I just think of hipsters are sort of going against this, and I see it more in the common area where guys I think have more respect for not being that typical macho figure.
Entertainer, and he usually diffuses tension. He's a jokester, but he's not taken seriously. So how can we encounter someone like that who is the class clown, even though he has serious thoughts every now and then?
I think you have to look at the content of what he's saying. Is it serious or is it joking? So I feel like that's the first thing you need to do. You need to differentiate between those two.
And even his jokes may have a kernel of something he really thinks. So I think, even just the jokes may show either part of him or something that he values.
Yeah, I think I've encountered multiple class clowns, whether they were my friends or they were students. And okay, so anyway, I knew a entertainer in high school, and he would often get very frustrated with teachers or classmates because he would actually say something serious, and everyone would laugh, it's a joke. So I feel like if we put our entertainers in positions of leadership, that's going to get people to take them seriously. Yes.
So the next one is the conscience. This is someone who's part of the group, but still has very strong values, who's probably part of the group because of some external factor, like being rich or just knowing the guys for a long time or something. But again, he doesn't have much. His values aren't respected in the group, and he isn't necessarily the most respected.
I feel like that's the same with the fly, because after a while people get tired of them, so they're just kind of pushed aside, but they're only needed when they're worth something to the group. So I feel like those two are very similar.
And like maybe a way that we could encourage them to step out of that is to like show them they're valuable,
Yes.
like show them their work is needed, and encourage what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, moving on to the punching bag. The punching bag is kind of used by everyone, and in the bullying research that I found, a way to help the punching bag in the group is to give them some kind of aid and support. So try to do some cognitive restructuring, possibly some anxiety management, coping strategies, enhancement of social skills, so that way they can branch out to other groups that their core values are more aligned with, that are going to treat that person better, and strategies for improving self-esteem. So it gives them that push to actually step out of that group.
Okay, our last personality type is the champion, and he's not really controlled like all of the other personalities are. He's positive and people respect him and like him, and he takes criticism well. He's comfortable hanging out with all of the guys in all of these groups, and he holds his own opinions even though he listens to others.
So I think overall, by identifying the different personality types in the classroom and knowing like how they function together and separately, we have a better understanding of how to teach toward these different students and how to have them still get an education that's meeting the standards and excelling their character while combating the hierarchy of male adolescents.
And parents, there's some different strategies for parents. Those who have more aggressive children, such as the masterminds and the associates, have higher standards for them. So if a teacher or a guidance counselor, when these issues are brought up in some kind of meeting, could say, maybe you should not put so much responsibility or expectations on the student in order to kind of manage that aggressive behavior. And the students with calmer personalities that are more susceptible to the other students, research shows that if the parents are given some kind of training through some kind of bullying seminar, they will be better prepared to help the student through those situations and provide additional support in the home as well.
That's it.
Nice job,